From PRX and the Big Questions Project, this is Rock That Doesn't Roll. I'm Andrew Gill, a public radio journalist who was raised on Christian rock.
And I'm Leah Payne, author of God Gave Rock and Roll to You, A History of Contemporary Christian Music.
And for this bonus episode of Rock That Doesn't Roll, we are bringing you behind the scenes, probably the farthest behind the scenes to as far as history goes, and the nascency of this podcast. We are talking with, possibly like someone who was present at the Big Bang for this thing. I think this is Lars Gotrich of NPR Music. And thank you, Lars, for being here with us.
Yes, welcome.
Yeah, I'm excited to explain why I am responsible, at least for the inkling of this show. Yes,
at least for the self-reflection that began the process of this show coming to being. So just in case listeners weren't listening with a fine-tooth comb to our first episodes, we'll just get this out of the way quickly, that Lars works at NPR Music and you book Tiny Desk concerts. And when I saw that you had booked Amy Grant for a Tiny Desk concert, I kind of went temporarily insane. And I started
you had a little downward spiral.
I did.
on X, formerly known as Twitter, and
yes.
You added me.
Yes, Lars and I were mutual follows, so I was able to at least do it in private and DMs, so at least it wasn't a public meltdown. But I was just could not wrap my head around booking Amy Grant. So we'll get more into the deep and, more thought out reasons for booking Amy Grant and all of that stuff later on. But Lars, I just want to publicly say for our audience and for everyone out there, I apologize for coming at you like that. And I appreciate your graciousness in talking with me today. So,
yeah, I have to say
we are here, but for the grace of God and Christian rock.
There we go.
You know what? I don't even know what happened in that DM situation, but I do know that Andrew says that you are a very gracious person. So we actually really appreciate you coming and talking with us. I asked him, what did you say? He's like, I don't know. So welcome.
I can dig it up now if you want.
But yeah, why don't we actually start with your background with Christian rock? And this, as far as I can tell, you started writing about music at 15. And it was Christian punk that you were writing about. So how did that come about?
So I grew up, as many of your guests on your podcast have explained, I've shared a very similar story. Grew up in a very Christian household, and went to church 3 days a week, and I learned how to play music through my church. So I learned how to read music and sing, and I'm good at instruments with strings, but I learned on brass, but I hated brass, but that's a whole diversion for another time.
And you were in Georgia, right? In Atlanta area?
I grew up, I wasn't born in Georgia, but I was raised in Georgia from the age of 7. And in my household, we played a lot of, especially choral and brass music, specifically written for Christians, basically. But my mom, who eventually became a Christian singer in her own right, she grew up. She was one of the original Jesus freaks. In the early 70s. She had a bunch of different bands / street ministries, and that actually put out records. She doesn't allow me to name some of them because she's embarrassed by them because she was a teenager. But one of them that she is proud of is a band called Redemption. And they put out a record called Gone Fishing. And it's actually really great. If you're into Chicago and Blood, Sweat, and Tears, that's the vibe.
Oh, nice.
In the Bible that the it's freedom from sin, and that there's power for a new way of life. If I give it a chance to break this nature of mine, I'll have nothing to lose.
You know, she would play me the records that she would listen to. So Larry Norman was truly one of my first rock and roll loves, besides, you know, the Beatles and all the stuff I was listening to on the oldie station, and the second chapter of Acts, and there's a group called Lamb, which nobody really talks about, but they actually had some really great songs that I still return to on occasion.
Behold the son of Abraham, sent by God our people to redeem. When he came forth from Bethlehem, I heard the angels sing.
And so that was always kind of in my household growing up. And, you know, eventually you get into, you know, my first concert technically was DC Talk, in the 7th grade. It was the True Love Waits tour.
Oh.
So
nice.
Michael W. Smith and I think Newsboys, they played at Atlanta Fulton County Stadium. So that was technically my first concert, but basically a year later in 8th grade, this would have been in probably 96. I, of course, spent a lot of time in Christian bookstores, like a lot of your other guests have. And I just started, my mom would go there to buy books because she's quite the scholar herself. And I would go to the music section. And one day, I credit this moment for kind of two roads diversion of wood. I bought the Jesus Freak single that had a bonus CD-ROM content, but then I also bought it simply based on the artwork. I just like the artwork. Didn't know anything about them, but the album Perfecta by Adam Again. And I just thought it was a cool, weird, mysterious record cover. And I remember putting it on and sort of hating it, but wanting to like it since I spent my allowance on it.
There's a lot for me to say, about 100 ways for me to wrap my words around your face. It won't do any good. I never really could convince.
But the more I listen to it, the more it's become sort of a Rosetta Stone for me, that record. I just have such an appreciation for not only the way that Eugene wrote songs, but produced them, and his lyrics were especially on Perfecta, which he had gotten away from being so explicit with how he wrote about God. This record was depressing. And for a middle schooler, I was like, what's he talking about? This is a bummer, but I'm kind of into it. And the guitars are so loud and grungy.
And then, of course, he went on to produce Starflyer 59 and so many of the, iconic late 90s Tooth and Nail type stuff.
And then from there on in, I'm a Tooth and Nail kid, throughout most of the late 90s. Fell in love with Starflyer, which is still one of my favorite bands to this day. And I could just list names of bands, but I went to Cornerstone in 1997, the big music festival, and I went with my much older cousins who were from Illinois because they had gone many years previous. So I just kind of followed them around, and I got exposed to so much stuff that I otherwise wouldn't have known. So I saw Blaster the Rocket Boy. I saw Sixpence None the Richer and Five Iron Frenzy and the Supertones, because that was my 1 year of liking ska.
It happened to so many.
Yeah.
It happened to so many.
Yeah.
Throughout high school, that was still such an important seat, especially growing up in Atlanta, in the Atlanta suburbs. My church that I went to was in downtown Atlanta, so I spent a lot of time there. And Atlanta was this weird nexus for the Christian punk underground, which became my whole life for like basically 4 years. There's a church whose name I don't remember that I saw bands like Starflyer and Hope's Fall play at a bunch. Jay Baker, he moved to Atlanta in the 90s, and he started a ministry right downtown called Revolution, and he also had a concert venue called Safe House. And so I would see bands like Dear Ephesus and 238 and an early version of Anne Berlin back when they were a pop punk band called Sego 24/7. I think that's right. I know way too much about stuff that people forget about.
Somebody was telling me Amberlin is like the child of a famous praise pastor or somebody. Who was telling me that? Anyways, do you guys know their
I was
lineage
telling you that one of the members of Anne Berlin's aunt was in a Southern gospel group.
That's it. You were telling me that.
A CCM journalist introduced me to, because he was saying, oh yeah, well, let me show you he said his family, and he's amazing. But anyway, he said his family has they were in a Southern gospel group, and then he sent me their picture, and he said, hey, that's one of the members, but I didn't ask him who. So maybe we should put it up on
It's almost
on
like we could
Instagram
play
and be like, find this Anne Berlin aunt.
You could play like a game, kind of like the 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon, but with Christian, rock or punk bands, and connect them to something Southern gospel or a mega church, and
you could totally do it.
2 steps maybe, like usually.
Yeah, it's Corey Mann who listens. So thank you, Corey. That was a fun story. I loved it. I'm going to live off that for a while. Anyway.
No, so Lars, was there like a rule in your house that you couldn't buy secular music, or why did you just stick with the just Christian stuff? Were you having a personal conviction that you felt it was important?
I think it was partly that. It was partly that my parents did kind of like look at the CDs that I would buy. So like I remember I bought REM's Out of Time, and it has the song Losing My Religion.
The proto-deconstruction anthem, I say now.
Well, but here's the thing. This is something that I only learned recently, and I feel ashamed as a Southerner for not knowing this like turn of phrase. But losing my religion doesn't mean that you're deconstructing your faith. It just means that you're getting mad.
Right.
That's literally all it means. Okay. I'm losing my religion.
Right. I'm in the flesh. That kind of thing.
Yeah. So my parents did, keep an eye on things. And I do believe when I went to Cornerstone 97, someone was handing out a zine. And it was basically a large part of the zine was challenging people to give up their secular CDs. And I was convicted by it because I was a very sensitive and sheltered good Christian boy. And so I remember telling my mom that I was going to do this, and she wasn't disappointed, but she was concerned because she is a musician. And so she didn't want me to lose out on my music education. So what she did is she actually absconded with a few of them. So that she would hold on to like some, I don't remember what they were. But I think that only lasted a year because by 98 or 99, I got into the Smashing Pumpkins and then it was all over. So
like it happens. That's great.
yeah, I was just like, oh, Smashing Pumpkins, this is exactly everything I want in music. And, you know, I had a friend who years ago, we met through college radio, and we realized that we were both, there was one day where he was wearing a T-shirt by the band Dennis and Mars, which is a band that I saw a lot at the Safe House Jay Baker's venue in Atlanta. And so we struck up a conversation, and over a course of time, he said, I think Christian kids actually have great taste in music because they've realized later on all the bands, their favorite bands, were ripping off. so like you listen to Blenderhead and then you get into Fugazi or The Blamed, and it just kind of like spirals from there. So yeah.
Nice.
That's great. When you like went that direction, did you find that you were able to maintain relationships with your friends and your community in the kind of Christian punk scene, or was there like moving into another musical venue, did that mean leaving that world behind at all?
So I graduated high school in 2001, and I purposely went to the University of Georgia because I knew that it had a great music scene in Athens. And I kept tabs on what was happening, mostly stuff that was happening on Velvet Blue Music, which is more kind of like the artier side of the scene.
Yeah. Were you,
Tooth and Nail.
I have a specific question. Were you part of the email list back in the day? The Velvet Blue email list?
No, but I was on the Velvet Blue Music, the message board, as well as Vagrant Cafe.
Yes.
Which is, I know, as a touchstone. I still keep in touch with a lot of those Vagrant Cafe folks.
Yeah,
to this day.
Yeah, like the late 90s, the Velvet Blue email list was a huge part of my like music world. I was reading, 20 emails a day from that thing. And so people like Andrew Horton and all these other, J. Edward Keyes and such, all these people were active there. So I wondered if we were on it at the same time or not. I couldn't remember. So
no, never joined the email list, but was heavy on the message boards. But after like a couple years in college, especially being at Athens, my world just opened up, not only musically, but spiritually, and I was exposed to so many different ideas about how you could be and exist in the world in ways that my, Christian conservative upbringing didn't offer. So I had some ties, bands that I would still love and like keep tabs on, like Starflyer was the biggest one, obviously. Like I went back to Cornerstone because Roadside Monument was reuniting. And that was the only reason I went, but ended up, getting to see Woven Hand when that was still a new project for David Eugene Edwards. He hadn't even come out with an album yet. Got to see, bands like Esther Drang and Rosie Thomas when she was still fairly new. And I made different friendships that way. But I was starting to distance myself from that scene. And it kind of like was sort of, it coincided with what I consider sort of the end of the Christian punk underground, because when once Under Oath came out, especially They're Only Chasing Safety, the idea of the Christian punk underground didn't matter anymore. once those records came out. Everybody likes to cite Sufjan Stevens, but I think as being kind of like the crossover for that scene where more people were paying attention. But honestly, it was stuff like Under Oath, because they were actually pioneering a brand new sound, and so everybody was following them. And so you get a lot of people who are going to those shows who had nothing to do with Christianity, and I stopped going to their shows too, but I got the impression that at a certain point they stopped preaching from the stage, because that was a thing I used to see them do, because that was the thing that was expected.
Oh yeah.
Of like people just in like who are like 17 years old, and they're expected to like lead people to Christ from the stage. And it's like, you don't know anything at 17. Right. Don't.
You know, I talked to so many contemporary Christian music artists who, some from like the more edgy scene and some from like, you know, straight down the middle of the road, and almost all of them voiced some sort of discomfort with having to, you know, you go to some church and then they're like, okay, and now it's time, you know, and being young or just uncomfortable with doing that. You know, some people weren't raised in the forms of evangelicalism where an altar call was like a thing, you know. So I really felt for those folks as well as the fans, but that's an uncomfortable experience if you're not really ready to do something like that.
And I feel like some measure of guilt of like feeding into that culture when I was a teenager, because I would, if a band didn't say something from the stage to basically a room full of people that already believe the same thing anyway, I would get upset. And I look back, this is like a lot of like years of self-therapy, like not being a judgmental person anymore, to the extreme that I really I like. It's something that I have to like be very mindful of myself. But it's like, especially when I was a teenager, I was like a judgy Christian kid, and part of that's me, but part of that is just kind of like the institution of the church telling everybody how they should think, how they should feel, how they should witness to others. And I remember when I had the realization that it didn't have to be that way, that I got mad. And that I had to like spend a lot of time like reassessing how not only my relationship with the church, but with God as well. And, you know, the kids call it deconstruction these days. They didn't call it deconstruction 12 years ago, but that's what I did. And it was like, you know, it was a scary and lonely time, but ultimately like a useful one. And I always kind of laugh at evangelicals who are so scared by this concept, because I came out on the other side a much better person, and even more girded in my faith than ever before. And it looks completely different than when I was a teenager. And I don't know. There, I am now off my soapbox.
Well, when you were at University of Georgia, and I assume the time you're talking about is while you were in college, maybe. Is that about the right time period of what you were?
I mean, the deconstruction stuff happened
post-college,
like it was a post-college situation.
How did you survive at like a very cool college radio station in Athens, Georgia, as a judgy, recovering judgy evangelical teen who, hung out at the...
I basically had to have my ass handed to me, which was really important.
Okay, everybody, we're going to stop this interview right here. And if you want to hear the rest of it, join us over on our Patreon, patreon.com/RTDR. that's like the only way that we're going to be able to keep making this show is if people join our Patreon. So.
Yes, and trust me, you want to stick around for the end of this conversation. The very last part is the most beautiful part of our conversation. So subscribe, please,
Yes.
please.
From PRX.